Namaste and welcome to Dr. Varadha Shambus. She works at Jawaharlal Nehru University at the Department of Law and Governance and teaches. Thank you so much for joining us today. And just a brief chat before has sparked a lot of questions. And thank you for being a part of Indic Academy's meta retreat on storytelling.
Thank you. Thank you, Aparnaji, for having me on your show.
Thank you. Could you tell us something about, you were talking about us celebrating the 350th year of Chhatrapati Shivaji's coronation. And in that context, you also spoke about the sense of identity, the Marathi identity. So in the context of your own interest and your research, could you tell us something more about this identity that is carved by and the identity of the state, nation state, as well as the state as a unit?
Sure. So, thank you for this question because it's very dear to my heart. As you said, this year we are celebrating 350th year of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's coronation, and it has manifold meanings for Indianness, for Marathi identity, of course, but more importantly, what we have been told constantly, and particularly as a student of political science, when we read on theories of nation and nationalism and the kind of debates that we have been harped on, whether India was nation or not. So all these questions can easily be addressed through this one incident of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's coronation, not just 200 years back, but 350 years back. So it was in the later half of the 17th century, to be precise, 1674, when Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj was coronated. And the idea of Swaraj, the idea was to establish a politically sovereign nation state. So this is not something which is merely an effort, the sporadic effort on the parts of Marathas, because we also need to remember when we are talking about establishment of Swaraj, that this Swaraj and under the leader, which was established under the leadership of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, continued to dominate the political scene in India, not just in Maharashtra, but in India, until the British took over the power. So it's important to note that even the British historians like Randolph acknowledge, we can disagree with what rest of the things they have written and we can debate about that. But even somebody like Randolph, who otherwise is very critical of Indian ethos and Indian traditions, even he writes that the British took over power in India from the Marathas and not Mughals. But unfortunately, our history books do not really mention this. So at least from say 1650 to 1818, when the Union Jack was unfurled at Shaniwarwada, which was the capital of the Peshwas, almost 200 years, Marathas dominated the political scene, not just in terms of ideology, the but also geographically. So very often we say Atak to Katak and Peshawar to Kanyakumari, Tanjavur, Peshawar to Tanjavur. That's the political map of the Marathas. So to acknowledge this, and this is not something, and this cannot happen with sporadic efforts. To maintain this Swaraj, it took a systematic design, it took systematic efforts, and it had an ideological, philosophical foundation. So when I started working on my projects as MPhil student and later on PhD student at JNU, the question was, what led Maharashtra to be the so-called progressive state? Of course, one answer lied in this political Swaraj, but second also in terms of the social reforms that happened in Maharashtra, not just starting with say Mahatma Phule and Savitri Bai Phule, which is like later half of the 19th century, but much before Savitri Bai and Mahatma Phule, or even other social reformers of the time. There is a long legacy of santas who were very, very reformer in their attitude, particularly when it came to women, untouchables, and Shudras. So this progressiveness, and because I come from Pune, because I'm a born Marathi, this was something that intrigued me. And then the inquiry started, as in terms of, an interesting part that I witnessed was Maharashtra, particularly in the mid of the 20th century, becomes the land of almost all ideologies. So we have the genesis of left ideology in Maharashtra, the so-called right ideology, women's movement. So all different movements regarding annihilation of untouchability, the caste-based movements. So Maharashtra witnessed all these movements. So even some environmentalist movements started in this land. So the question was, what makes this land so fertile for reform? And then the probing and questioning started, and that's how I ended up going back to Chhatrapati Shivaji's past, the Maratha past under Chhatrapati Shivaji. And then I realized there is a particular design to the efforts which were made by Shivaji Maharaj along with his soldiers, and that came to be known as Maharashtra Dharma. So, and then the question was, what was the contribution of the santas, the long lineage and the long legacy of santas of Maharashtra, starting from say Chakradhar, who was the founder of Mahanubhav Sampradāya, uh, Gnaneshwar, Eknath, Tukaram, Namdev, uh, Ramdas. These are different santas of Maharashtra. And of course, a long list of women santas. So the question was, when these political activities are happening, what role have these santas played? Because very often what happens, and again, that's something that we think from the colonial mindset, that the moment we utter a word bhakti, it is seen as otherworldly. It is seen as transcendental. Without a doubt, bhakti is transcendental. So I have no qualms in terms of admitting and saying, because that's what the literature tells us, that's what santas tell us, that's what all our scriptures tell us, that karma, dhyan, jnana, bhakti, all these are parts of moksha or mukti, or whatever term we want to use for that particular attainment and enlightenment. However, bhakti by no means, and that is what I have arrived at after studying bhakti literature, and particularly the Vārkarī Santas in Maharashtra, that by no means bhakti is blind to the social and the political happenings which are in this world. So interestingly, what I can tell you, the anecdote I would like to share with you, the first ever Prakrit commentary on Bhagavad Gita, which is known as Jnaneshwari, the treatise or the composition by Jnaneshwar Maharaj, and it is the first vernacular or Prakrit commentary, critical commentary on Bhagavad Gita, and which was composed in 13th century. Now, when an important part of it, as I said, it is in Prakrit language. It is in Marathi. Now, in 13th century, when Sanskrit is seen as the language of knowledge, and particularly the spiritual knowledge, Jnaneshwar Maharaj, Sant Jnaneshwar, in 13th century makes a choice to write a commentary in Prakrit Marathi. And when he says, when he mentions in Jnaneshwari itself, and there are OVs in the Jnaneshwari which mention about this, that why is it uh, writing commentary in Prakrit? He says it is for the benefit of Stri Shudradi, and Ityadi and others. So then the question is, this choice of writing it in Marathi, was it a political choice or not? What is happening here? Is it a social statement or not? So by default, the message of Naneshwari, we cannot say the message of Naneshwari is social reform, right?
Yeah.
But cannot be ignored that while giving the spiritual message, while giving the message of transcendence and enlightenment and mukti, which is the core subject matter of Naneshwari, and so is Bhagavad Gita, there is something else that's happening. The kind of choices which are made by these santas, they are a statement on the socio-political, economic happenings of their time. So, and there are other verses of Naneshwar Maharaj which says, Marathachi bolu kautuke, amruta tehi paisa jinke, which means that our Marathi is so lucid that it can actually beat the nectar. So that's the kind of, and it's a beautiful Marathi, even as a literary piece, it's beautiful composition. So these choices, we need to look at these choices as conscious choices. These are not merely choices that are uncontextualized by social and political happenings. So and we see this legacy of advocacy of Marathi throughout the Varkarī literature. So whether it is Namdev Maharaj, of course, Namdev Maharaj eventually goes to Punjab. Ghuman is the place where he eventually resides, and Guru Granth Sahib has some of the compositions of Namdev Maharaj included, and building alliances across the regions, taking that pataka is flag of Sanatan Dharma, of Bhagavad Dharma, and spreading the message of Bhagavad Dharma across the land of India is something that the Santas did. And one of the testimonies of that is the pilgrimage which was taken up by Namdev Maharaj. So, and then this continues in the writings of Eknath Maharaj, who was in 16th century. He also writes, Sanskrit bhashe deve keli, Marathi काय चोरा पासून झाली, meaning Sanskrit bhasha is Girvanavani. It is Dev bhasha. It is the language of gods. But is Marathi then language of thieves? Question which Maharaj asks, and throughout he composes in Marathi. We also need to remember that Eknath Maharaj was located in Python, which was Python of that time, which today is known as Sambhajinagar, the part of Sambhajinagar in Maharashtra region on the banks of Godavari. And in fact, Python at that time was known as Dakshina Kashi. So the orthodoxy, the emphasis on Sanskrit was quite high. And in the midst of that, he composes Bhavartha Ramayan, which is in Marathi. So, and then of course Tukaram Maharaj, all women santas, Muktabai, Janabai, Sorabai. What is important to note here, it is not just the so-called Brahmin santas who are in the business of compositions and disseminating the spiritual knowledge. Somebody like Chokha Mela, who actually belonged to the untouchable Mahars, even his compositions, his wife Soirabai, her compositions are de facto part of any bhajan or bhajan sandhya that happens in Maharashtra, or any bhajan sandhya about Varkarī Santas. So what we need to acknowledge that the Sant tradition of Maharashtra, it accommodated, it invited all the Santas, and we see the Sant tradition have individuals coming from all strata of society. There are women, there are the so-called untouchable individuals who rose to the heights of santhood, if I can use that term as like this. So this change, this reform is not something that was happening in isolation. And coming back to the question of Chhatrapati Shivaji's coronation, when this was the legacy, starting from 13th century till the 17th century, much had gone into the making of the culture of the land. Whether it is emphasis on Marathi language, whether it was emphasis on having a pious life, whether it was emphasis on celebrating celebrating one god, which is in the form of Pandharpur Vittala. So getting all the sources together and consolidating the strength of people, that is something that happens over almost 4 to 5 centuries. And the culmination of that, so basically giving confidence to people in their dharma, in their ways of life, in their language, is something that happens as the foundation. And the culmination of that is seen in the form of Swaraj under Chhatrapati Shivaji, which is in the 17th century. So this is the lineage, and of course, it is not just the Varkarī Sampradāya which lays this foundation, but something like Mahanubhav Sampradaya of Chakradhar Swami. Even they were very radical in their approach. In fact, they were too ahead of their times. I must say that there were no taboos concerning women and purity and pollution concepts. There were no taboos regarding caste. In fact, they vehemently criticized the caste hierarchies, the gender hierarchies. They were very open in that sense. But as I said, probably they were too ahead of their times, and even the society of the time could not stomach the progressiveness of the Maharashtra Sampradaya, and eventually they developed some scripts, some practices, then which became very secretive in nature. So the Varkarī Sampradāya was more people friendly. It was focused more towards people, and this approach of gradual change, slow and steady changes which were disseminated through the santas. Mahanubhav Sampradaya was more of radical in nature in that sense, though it also was a Vaishnava Bhakti Sampradaya and created a long lineage of santas. In fact, one of the first poem is composed by Mahanubhav woman saint known as Mahadaisa or Mahadambika. So, so again, but even Mahanubhav Sampradaya, this Mahanubhav Panth, they also focused, and this lineage of taking pride in Marathi starts there from Mahanubhav Sampradaya. Later on, we see Samartha Ramdas, and Samartha Sampradaya is the Sampradaya known after him. And he seems to have played an active role in the establishment of Swaraj in collaboration with Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Because his treatise Das Bodh has a very clear political messaging as well, apart from, and as I said, apart from the spiritual knowledge of it, it also has a clear political message. So, and these are different sampradayas. Of course, were other sampradayas which were working in this era, but I would like to focus on these three, and that's something that I have worked on, so I can talk about them. So that's where the political and the religious, or rather the bhakti dimension, I saw that it gets intertwined. It's not something that is not connected. Though it
Yes.
was challenged because hardly there was any material when I began to look at bhakti from this dimension. Many scholars have written about, say, the spiritual, the social, and even the social reform dimension, but political dimension of it, in terms of identities, in terms of taking pride in one's nation and culture and language, that is something that was rarely found. So I think that's where it all began.
Yeah. Thank you. You mentioned Tanjore, and I am from Tanjore. So the evidence of Marathi and the Marathi presence there is very alive even now. For instance, my mama was saying there are like eight Durga shrines set up by the Marathas, and that is why Tanjore has never faced any kind of natural or political issue because it was guarded on eight sides, including Akasha and Bhumi. These shrines are there now. So you also mentioned that you're working on a book, right?
I
On
work. Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
governing religion on along those lines. So could you
Yeah.
tell us something about this book, and how does it explain this phenomenon of, politics and religion being protective of each other, and uh, feeding on each other?
Right. So, as I said, my training has been in political science, and right now I'm working at Center for Study of Law and Governance at JNU. So, the question, considering my interest and what the kind of work I have been doing, the question was, how do we see law and governance in the light of religion, or other way around, how do we see religion in the light of law and policy and governance? So when I started thinking about this, it I realized that there is a lot of literature, and in fact this was the realization which I had even when I was working on Varī pilgrimage as a PhD candidate. So much of writings, particularly in the domain of governance, policy, political science, comes with the idea of secularism. So the paradox of this academic writing is much on religion has come from the lens of secularism. So then I realized that okay, we need to think, because the idea of secularism is primarily to deal with how the state should uh, relate or not relate with religion. So, what should be the relationship between state and religion? That is the core debate on secularism. And there are many strands of secularism that we witness across the globe. Different nation states follow different policies pertaining religion. Some are religious states per se, they have their official religions. And of course, most of our neighboring countries, they declare themselves as having some particular faith as governing faith. However, in India, since the very inception of the constitution, the kind of ethos that we saw in that sense was the ethos of Sarva Dharma Samabhav. I wouldn't say that Constitution of India is blind to faith, is blind to religious affairs. However, there seemed, probably because of the history of partition, the way the country got divided, there was some hesitancy. It seems to me, and it's a completely personal opinion, it seems to me there is still some hesitation dealing with religion, as we see in the draft of the constitution, or the constitution that we have today. So the way constitution looks at religion, the provisions of the constitution, obviously the freedom of religion, article 25 to 28, rights of minorities, protection of rights of minorities under article 29 and 30, and sporadically we see, say, under directive principles of state policy under article 44, there is something about cow protection, but at the same time there is something about scientific temper. So this is and now there are many scholars who have worked on how religion gets intertwined, say the depiction from Ramayana on the original copy of constitution. So how do we then reconcile these western notions of secularism that we have been told to follow very continuously? But on the contrary, we also see the anecdotes which are rooted in the religious traditions, in the spiritual traditions of India, which are evident through the draft of the constitution. So the question is, what kind of relationship should the state have? Should the state uh, actively work on and work with people of faith? And when I say governing faith, I'm also seeing those who proclaim to be atheists, because that way that becomes like when we see any of the forms, the government forms, the under the column of religion, one column is added, and that is of atheism. So interesting part is atheism becomes a kind of religion in itself. So how should the state and how what is the way in which the state deals with different faiths when there is a clash of morality and law? What role should the state play when there is a clash of two different moralities emanating from different religious and um, spiritual traditions, I would say? How should the state deal with it? And should the state actively propagate a particular kind of religious faith? Should the courts, and because we have seen from Jallikattu to Shabrimala to the Ayodhya temple to the recent uh, legislation and cases relating to Waqf board, the Sharia law, the personal laws, which are obviously guided by religion, there are
Mm.
number of times that the Supreme Court, the High Courts, the judiciary deals with religious matters. So something like Jallikattu or something like Shabrimala, should the courts have uh, the power, and should the court's verdict be considered as final? So these are the questions that we need to probe into when we are talking about governing faith. So there are, and when we are also talking about governing faith, we need to look at the places of worship,
Mm.
because in some cases the government interferes. The trusts are in fact run by the government agencies or by the government, or they at least have the nominations in those trusts, whereas others are completely non-interfered by the
Mm.
state. So there is also this disparity as far as the places of worships are concerned, and how the places of worship are governed, what is the role that the state is playing, and what should be the role that the state should play. These are all dimensions of governing faith. So when we talk about governing faith, it's a private faith as well as public faith, like something like Varī pilgrimage, or for that matter, any pilgrimage or large gathering like Kumbh Mela or Jagannath Puri, or say Dashera celebrations in different parts of the country. Uh, we need the state to maintain law and order so that people can celebrate their festivities. And that is irrespective of religion, whether it is Eid or whether it is Christmas celebration. All religious communities to have their festivities smooth going, the state needs to ensure law and order, and state is very much present in all these situations. So from personal faith to public faith, what is the relationship that the state is having and should have? That is the
Mm.
focus that I have been working on these days.
Mm. Fantastic. You also mentioned about the movement of ideas, and you gave two models where where it is a large number of people going together towards one destination, and the other is where the religious heads come with a message to the masses. So, this movement of ideas, how does it fit in with your overall research and of governance and storytelling and faith?
Can
How
you
do
be
you,
a little louder? I couldn't get the last part of your question.
sorry, how does this fit into your research, and which is more usually impactful? Where they are going in. I mean, is it possible to even evaluate impact in the two different movements of ideas? I mean, even in political research, how do we actually evaluate? What are your tools that you use when we talk about faith? You can give numbers saying of so many lakhs and so many crores people attend, but in terms of impact, long lasting impact on society or on individuals, is it possible? What are the tools that you use to political scientists use to evaluate impact?
Sure. So, as far as the question of circulation is concerned, and as I said, I was deeply interested in understanding how this Marathi identity gets constructed, or for that matter, any identity, even say how this Indian identity is constructed. So, it seems that ideas, whatever ideas, when they generate, whether they are progressive, regressive, whatever the form of idea, to become that into an ethos, to convert those ideas into ethos, there are processes that those ideas undergo. And one of that process is circulation of that idea. And that is something which is also evident in the modern literature about on nationalism, say how nationalism became a thing in say Europe. It is only through the print capitalism when the idea started getting disseminated at a large scale. So without even knowing each other, we still feel bound to particular ethos, and that is what creates a sense of identity. So how in the how in the era where there was no mass production of this material, the common ethos was circulated. So that, and as I said, through this circulation of common ideas, the ethos of the society and communities develops. And the answer lied in circulation of people. So when, what are the ways in which at large scale we feel or at large scale we see and witness mass circulation of people? The classical method of mass circulation is found in the notion of pilgrimage. So that's how I began my PhD work, and most of the religions, most prominent religions of the world, and almost all of them have some notion of going to a sacred place. Probably the very idea of pilgrimage or going to sacred place started from this notion that, okay, let the people come together so that there is some sharing of understanding, whether it is the religious thought, whether it is the spiritual thought, or whether we want to say socio-political thought. Because when we go on the pilgrimage, of course we talk religiosity, of course we talk about transcendence and mukti, etc., but nowhere we stop only at this. We also talk about barish kaisa hua, how was rains in your place, how is the crop going, is it flooded, how is everything in the family, is there too much of mehengai, are the prices soaring, all this, and what is the political scenario, whether the elections are coming, whom are you going to vote, who is the leader who is working good in your area, which is the party which is doing better. All that is also the talk of the pilgrims. So it is not just the transcendental talk, it is not just about mukti and bhakti. As human beings who are embedded in this worldliness, this is also something that people talk about. So the question is where, so the second question that you attached with this question was, how, what are the tools to understand what is happening? So there are no per se skills, I would say, in terms of what is the impact and stuff. But when you talk to people in the lingo that they understand, and their lingo, then they open up, and then they start giving you anecdotes of many things that are happening in their life. For that you need to create that comfort zone. The method that I use usually for this kind of research is, of course, one is ethnographic method, that you go participate, observe, play with them, dance with them, sing with them, live with them, eat the same food that they are eating, and be part of this, that's participant observation. And secondly, in depth detailed interviews. Once you become friends, then they open up to you, and that is very important when you start recording their stories. So most material comes from these lived experience that people are willingly sharing with you, not by some scale or some parameters in that sense. So for that you need academic training, how to decipher the meanings from whatever is told to you, and how to connect that with the project that you are working on. So that's the kind of method that I use. But circulation is something that creates ethos, and mass scale circulation through pilgrimages, wherein people from their home, from their routine, from their domestic, go to a place which is sacred. Now this sacrality of a place is also associated with particular ethos. Across pilgrimage sites, there is particular ethos that gets disseminated through that place. What is that particular ethos is something that you can find out at a sacred place. And the second form of circulation that I did for my fellowship at Nehru Memorial Museum and Library was in the form of kirtan. Now, unlike pilgrimages, kirtans or pravachans are something wherein one particular person, we can call that person a messenger, a man or a woman. They go from place to place, and they are the carriers of a message. they embody a kind of message that they want to disseminate, and through that there is a constant circulation. So what is an important anecdote here, or what I would like to share with you, say in Varkari tradition, I call the Varī, the Pandharpur Varī, which is like 18 to 20 day one of days affair. Every year a Varkari is supposed to go to Pandharpur. So I call this a crash course. So I'm sure 10th board exam or 12th board exam, students do these crash courses. So Pandharpur Vari, the pilgrimage, is like a crash course for a bhakta. You come together. It's also important to have satsang, because these places, these practices, they provide an opportunity for satsang. You look at other people, the ways they are following, whether meditation or nam jap, etc., spiritual practices. So satsang is important part of this pilgrimage. So people venture out and they are in this crash course for 21 days. But when they go home, how do they keep themselves refreshed with the knowledge and the ethos and the principles that they have imbibed during the pilgrimage? So in that case, the Varkarī Sampradāya has this beautiful system of kirtan. And then there is Ekadashi Vrat. So every Ekadashi they will fast. Every Ekadashi they will go to the local temple to listen to the bhajans, and they will sing bhajans and abhangs. Uh, on every possible occasion, they will go to the local temple and listen to the discourse pravachan. So these I say as routine unit tests. So that keeps you in the loop of that bhakti, and you never forget the uh, path on which you are walking. That, and then that way the Varī is eternal Varī. So the physical Varī is only once a year, but when you reenact those principles through kirtan, bhajan, singing, dancing, fasting, nama japa at home, or something called haripat at home, you recreate those memories of Varī every single day. And that is how the ethos is generated, that sustain communities over the years and centuries and millennia, I would say. So what is Sanatan about Sanatan Dharma? This Sanatan ethos that has been circulated over generations and generations, centuries after centuries, that is what keeps us going, and that is what connects us from this generation to our ancestors, whether pre-Vedic or Vedic or Puranic era or the medieval era. That is what keeps us all connected. So that's the ethos and the circulation of ethos.
So, just as a last question, you mentioned about as a child that your mother would take you to where the procession would come, and now you're studying it formally as a political researcher. What is the difference when this experience and observation is at a personal level, and when the experience is at an objective academic level? For instance, today morning there was a puja at the by the flower lady at the, she's worshipping the Bunny tree in Karnataka. And Bunny is supposed to be the wife of Veerabhadra Swami. So the tree becomes the Devi. So in most cultures we look at a deity who's taken a human like form. So when we do research and when we worship, directly as as people, what is the difference, and what is gained, what is lost when we look at it as a research?
Excellent question. And thank you so much for allowing me this window to reflect upon my own journey. I'll just share with you a very, very personal episode from my life. Unfortunately, I lost my mother, say, 11 years ago, as I started working on my PhD project. And she was deeply into the Bhakti tradition. She had her guru, she used to do Nam Sadhana, and the last conversation that I remember with my mother was precisely on this question that you are, in fact. So, if I can rephrase that, what is the relation between, say, inquiry and devotion? If I can rephrase your question in that particular way. So, I had asked this to my mother, that mother, you are a devotee, but don't you ever question this devotion? Don't you ever feel inquiring into whatever your guru is telling you? Don't you feel the need to know the answers? Even to begin with, do you ever feel the need to question? And if there at all is a need to question, then only there is a need to seek answers, right? And the answer that she had given me, that I still remember, and that is something that I carry on as her legacy with me. And that answer was, Varadha. My pet name at home is Shweta. So she said, Shweta, you are a person who probably have many questions. Remember that you will have to find your own answers, because there are no ready answers. But I have chosen a path of bhakti. I fully trust my guru. The only questioning that I have done probably while choosing the guru. And now that I have chosen a guru, I have full faith in my guru, and whatever my guru tells me, that's the ultimate answer. And I'm fully convinced whatever my guru tells me is for my good, is for good of my family, is for good of my society, and is for the good of the universe. But since you are a questioning mind, uh, probably it's a path that you will have to pick for yourself. But remember, you will have to find answers to these questions by hard work. The difference that I feel that my mother had and I have, her path is not easy. I wouldn't say bhakti is easy, but it's a relaxed path, because so it's like driving a car. Once you know you are driven by your guru, you can sit back, relax, and follow the path. But in academics, you are constantly on the driving seat. So you have to take care that you are not dashing anybody, you are driving carefully, there is no traffic, and whatever it takes to make small decisions about everything, you have to make those decisions as an academic. So, but fortunately, because of the this lineage that I have, nowhere I feel confident, and I at the same time I feel it's my responsibility. Nowhere through the academic lens we degenerate, or we create a kind of work that divides the society, that divides the national kind of ethos, the integrity is into question. So that is something that I'm convinced about, and I also feel that's the responsibility that I have. So looking at something critically is different than merely degenerating it into pieces. So looking at santas from the caste angle and dividing them into caste, vis-a-vis saying that okay, the tradition also had people from different castes. There is a difference in that, and the motive, and if I can say this with conviction, that the motive for this research is to create that synthesis and synergy. And I constantly need to be wary that nowhere the research creates those divisions in the society, among people, among sampradayas, etc., because it's a very slippery slope. The moment you use that logic and rationality as your tool, very often we keep dissecting, and in that dissection we create pieces. But it's a responsibility as a researcher, and who is blessed with the wisdom of these different traditions. And I really feel that it's a blessing that I could choose something like pilgrimage or Varī in the domain of political science. It's not by fluke, it's not my creation, but very convinced that it is by the larger design. I'm an instrument. And if that's the conviction, I think then things are settled. In that sense, then I'm not on the driving seat. My rationality and logic and reasoning, that comes only when I'm back to my table and writing and reading, etc. But even while doing that, I constantly have this idea that okay, this is the path and this is the task for which I'm being chosen. So once you know you are an instrument, you don't need to shoulder so many responsibilities, and that's freedom. That's true freedom, and I would say that's true
Mm.
academic freedom too.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Such a lovely ending to this conversation. Really amazing the way you have amalgamated both these aspects of divinity and governance. Thank you so much, Dr. Varadha, for joining us, and I hope we have a lot more work to read from you in the near future. Yeah.
Thank you, Aparnaji, for this opportunity, and particularly opportunity for me to reflect upon uh, my unfinished thoughts. Today's conversation was opportunity for me too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and namaste.
Namaste.